Okay, so welcome, all four of you. We're from the Autism Society of Colorado, and I think I'll let Ed introduce himself first.
Yeah. I'm Ed Steinberg. I'm the board chair of the Autism Society of Colorado. This is Dixie Periman, who is the heads up our educational advocacy direct service. Just a little bit about us, and then we'll get on with that, is that in addition to our work with the Autism Society, Dixie and I work together the Cherry Creek School District in Colorado, both as special education administrators, and I think combined we probably have about, oh yikes, Dixie, 50, 60 years of combined experience of working in the field, working with families. And I think the context of what we're going to talk about today is we know, that special education for kids on the spectrum, or special education in general, is so heavily litigated, so heavily conflicted, and times when parents, our typical scenario very often is when a parent comes to an IEP meeting and it's the parent and 6, 7, 8 professionals across the table, and that's when things start to not go very, very well. The last thing I'll say before we get on to that is that we want to hear from you, questions, comments, and all. But we come, even though we've worked at a school district, I was the director of special education. Dixie was an administrator working with kids on the spectrum. Our mindset, our philosophy, even though we were school district administrators, school district bureaucrats, if you will, is that the school district where we worked had a strong philosophy of work it out with the parents. The last thing in the world we want to do is to polarize the situation, force families into litigation. Due process hearings, which we'll talk about in a little bit, are in some ways necessary, but very often a colossal waste of time, energy, and money. So our stance, our philosophy when we were working with families is that let's work it out. Let's not polarize the situation.
Yeah. So these are kind of the general job description of an educational advocate. So trying to kind of bridge that gap between the family and the school, because there's obviously a wedge there, a crevice there, or there wouldn't be an issue. We're called in when there's issues. We're mediators, problem solvers, and actually specialize in IEPs. As special ed coordinator in a major school district here in the metro area, I went to tons of IEPs. And I found myself kind of mediating between the parent and the district, even though I was district then as well. So it's that I've always had that working with parents kind of concept that you need to understand where they're coming from, what's going on at home, what's going on in their lives, and then try to bring that together with the school instead of just looking at the surface of what's going on with the kid.
And we're going to talk a little bit about how the services that we're providing through the Autism Society is different than the typical advocacy, the typical special education advocate. But what's also really important, I think you all know this, is that there are advocates and there are advocates. There are advocates that come in, they're quite frankly can be flamethrowers, coming in and angry, upset, ready to take on the school district, and quite frankly, we don't see those as very effective advocates. Good advocates are ones that, as Dixie was mentioning, may perhaps serve as mediators, problem solvers, bring the families and the school together, which goes beyond just a knowledge of the law, but really gets into that ability to communication, problem solving, but to see the role of the advocate as bringing people together as opposed to winning or losing.
So when we have a family that contacts the Autism Society office, then after an initial conversation, they contact me, and I go out and visit with the family first. We sit around their table and we talk about what's going on, what is the issue, what are the issues, and then I also get kind of a feel for the family dynamics of what's going on here. Is this a full plate? Usually it is. Or is this a real savvy parent that knows the law real well? Or is this somebody who's really needs some help with that? And then I go and observe the child at school and get that whole side of it. The team, what are they thinking, all that. Now, if it's a high school kid, usually I don't go and observe the classroom. I find an opportunity to interview or to talk to that student, unless it's a student who's nonverbal and self-contained, then I would probably observe. So I get both sides, and then the end goal is to partners. So we try to set up a partnership between the home and the school, and then you have the outcome. Sometimes it's a compromise. I usually tell parents, it might be a compromise here. And then there's a lot of follow-up. The advocates that I was familiar with and working in the school district forever, they were, come to the IEP meeting, that's it. They didn't know the child. They really didn't, sometimes had never even met him. So we wanted to set this up entirely different so that we had a good feel for, or so that I had a good feel for what was going on.
Let me give a real concrete example about how the services that Autism Society of Colorado is offering through Dixie's program, a real common scenario, a common issue that can lead to litigation. And again, if you've worked in the schools, if you're a parent in the school, you know that there are times when a family will say, my child needs a one-on-one paraeducator. Or it could be the opposite. It could be the school demanding that your child have a one-on-one paraeducator, and the school says, no, you don't need that, your child doesn't need that, and we'll bring an advocate into an IEP meeting, and the advocate will typically just talk about the law. Well, you have to provide what the child needs, and that's where the argument begins. Well, what does the child need? We think the child needs this. You say the child needs that. The advocate typically doesn't know the child, the family, the curriculum, the teacher, the school, the whole ecological system. What's unique about the services that Dixie is providing, and again, this is a program that we hope to expand. We hope to expand it with Sherry Cheney, who is here in the audience, as we grow. The difference is that when Dixie gets involved and as our program grows, Dixie will go into the school and within a very short amount of time do a real quick, I'm going to call it a kind of an ecological audit of the school, and be able to come to the IEP meeting and say, based on data, based on my observations, based on my experience as a special educator, this is what Johnny needs as far as one-on-one support. It may not be full-time, it may not be anything at all, but having somebody that knows the child, the system that the child is functioning in, all the family dynamics, and to be able to come and say, Johnny needs assistance with a one-on-one paraeducator for this time, not this time. Here's the plan on how we're going to fade the paraeducator. That's very different than the typical advocacy service that is just waving the law and saying, this kid needs this without any data to
and we had a family that contacted me and said, my child needs a one-on-one para. So I found, go ahead, sir.
Our teacher's pretty receptive. I'm a parent, so I've got don't deal with the education. My son's fairly young. Are teachers pretty receptive when you guys come in, or is it kind of this, why are you coming in and judging our class?
Right.
Good question.
It depends. I've probably went to 20 or 30 different schools last school year, and only one said that we had to check this out with the director, and they did, and that person contacted me, and I went in, So there was a little hesitation there, but usually I tell them I'm just there to get to know the child. I'm not there to evaluate the staff. So I probably set it up in a pretty relaxed way, and when I'm there, I do a good job of complimenting the staff whenever I see something that they're doing. I compliment them. Usually they end up telling me everything, In one situation, the parent wanted the opposite. The parent wanted this student in an autism program, and he was fully included in general ed. And so I went in to observe, and the teaching staff wanted him in an autism program, but not because they wanted to get rid of him. They just thought that's where he belonged. The district wanted him fully included, which is usually the opposite. But we had to go through an IEP evaluation to get a new placement. But I agreed with him after a while. He just wasn't getting it. Everything was way over his head. Poor little guy was just struggling. So we finally got him into an autism program. But the short answer is no. I don't usually have any problem.
But that's a great question, because I don't know any teacher that doesn't have a sense of anxiety about something being observed by whomever. And I think one of the differences here, and this program, we don't want this program to be individual specific. Dixie Periman has a reputation across Colorado because she also does work with the Colorado Department of Education. Dixie is known as a straight shooter, and I think once people know that reputation, they realize that Dixie is going to be honest with the family, be honest with the school, disagree with the family, disagree with the school, but can do it in a way that she gets away with it really well.
Yeah. That example you were talking about, Ed, I had wanted one-to-one para. And so I went and observed the child, and I went back and sat down with the parent, and I said, yeah, you know what, he would just become prompt dependent if he had a one-to-one. He's pretty dependent now on people. And what if we said this kind of a situation where he was in small groups, because adult life is small groups. He was a middle schooler. So, adult life is not one-to-one, so he's got to learn to kind of work in a group at some point. So I just went in and did programming with the staff just a little bit different and fixed it up so he didn't need a one-to-one. So, but that's where I did kind of disagree with the parent. But a lot of the parents are right. I used to have this saying in Cherry Creek all the time: I hate it when parents are right because it means we're wrong. Oh.
That you're dealing with at the same time?
Usually, I think your work, Dixie's work, is cleaning up the mess that those advocates created.
I have families that had gone through several advocates.
Sort of polarizing the situation.
You're not dealing with it.
No, I'm not going to due process. That would be a lawyer. But. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right.
You can get some advocacy services for free through the like the ARC, the ARCs around Colorado, but those people are so very busy. So there are private advocates for a fee.
Right. But parents, you folks who are parents of kids with disabilities certainly have. You're an advocate already. You advocate for your child all the time. It's just not formal. You're not called an educational advocate or an advocate, but you do certainly have power. Districts pay attention to parents. It's quite common if parents get together and go to the director. What did you do, Ed? If parents came to see you, they have power.
And sometimes
you know your child best. You know them best.
I've found that very often there are times when parents are uncomfortable when we use the word power, and because it conjures up, I guess it conjures up competition, maybe something adversarial. But the reality is that, and again, we worked for a school district, so we don't see ourselves or as special educators as people that woke up in the morning and saying, how can we screw up the lives of kids on the spectrum? We wanted to work things out, but at the same time, there was an imbalance of power. There wasn't any way around it. I mentioned that earlier. When you have a parent coming in, and maybe it's the first IEP meeting, maybe it's the eligibility meeting, and you've got 8 people from the district, good people, benevolent people, but they're shooting test scores at you and making recommendations, and you don't really know what's going on until 2 days later you go, what happened there? This is why we want parents to be advocates and to know that they have the power that comes with, I think, knowledge.
Yeah,
and
I find that parents have good ideas about how to fix things. It might have to be shaped into the school district way of doing things, but they have some good ideas. For example, a parent of a little preschooler that I'm working with pretty significant autism, fairly nonverbal. This little girl, she's trying to decide, I have some ideas that she should be kind of taken care of around the year, and should I be putting her in an autism program in this southern Colorado town? They have one, but there's a waiting list. Or should I put her in a regular summer program of some kind? So, you have a lot of good ideas, and what I do is discuss it with her, and then she comes to the decision. Oh, yeah, that does sound like the best one. So, and parents have the long haul. The school district staff, you parents have this child for the rest of your life or theirs, So you really have that long-term connection. You have that long-term motivation to have this child be a productive adult. So I run into parents who really don't understand the level of autism or the level of the disability. In order to be a good advocate, it's pretty good idea to kind of have that in mind. What is the reading level? What is the math level? What's the communication level? Then that helps bridge the gap to the school staff. If the parent is asking for the student to be working on grade level material and they're 5 grades below, that's something the school staff would have trouble providing. So it's good to kind of know the level of the disability to be a parent advocate for your child, whether you have somebody with you like me or not. The key players in the school district. Some of the parents I work with know exactly who the next level person is that I need to talk to. They could find you, Ed, when you were director.
They always found me. And there's other ways. I hope your school district has what's called a SEAC, a Special Education Advisory Committee, which is, again, a group of parents and educators that meet on a regular basis, and it's an advisory group to the superintendent and school board. Another way that parents can get together and, I think, amass more power. Something I feel real strongly about, and I don't know if it's on the next slide or not, is that in addition to knowing your school district, really knowing the ins and outs of the administration, who to contact when, is to be knowledgeable about the law. Not that you need to be a lawyer, not that you need to have the level of knowledge of let's say, a very experienced advocate or a special education attorney, but I think it's so important that you avail yourselves and just know the basics of IDEA and your state law. So often I hear of well-meaning recommendations to parents who are anxious about the IEP meeting. Bring food. Food is always a good way to get the IEP team to relax. Bring a picture of your kid and put that right in the middle of the room so we'll know why we're here. That can be helpful, but whenever I hear those recommendations, it always feels like you're going, please be nice to me, please be nice to my kid. What I'm going to recommend, and I don't mean this in an adversarial way, but just in a real practical way, is that instead of putting the plate of cookies or your kid's picture, get a copy of Wright's Law, get a copy of Randy Chapman's Special Ed Law, and I'm being a little facetious, but and I don't mean this in an adversarial way. Put that down on the table. You're communicating. I know my stuff.
Right.
Not that the IEP team is necessarily going to ride roughshod over you, but knowledge is power.
Right.
And I think you have to have that level of knowledge to level the playing field when you're dealing with staff. Of course, if you can get a good advocate, that's much more helpful to have a second set of eyes and ears. But know the law yourself and let them know that you know it.
Right. And then we can help with some of the details. I had a family who moved in from another state. Where's the little preschool that's all day? My child went to a preschool for kids with autism all day. It's not offered in this district she was in. And so I had to kind of, filter that down to it's not a part of the law. I mean, your school district did it, but they don't have to here. And she was in a regular preschool blended program, which we offer a lot. Now, there are some districts in Colorado that do that, but certainly not the majority. And then things like ESY, that not understanding how they qualify for that. I mean, a lot of staff don't understand it. So it's those are the things that we can help with the details. But if you know your basic rights, then we can help filter the rest of it and get down to what's important for your child. And know how to resolve disagreements. Yelling and screaming is not a popular one. I like to focus on good communication. I tell the parents before we walk into a first meeting that if things start getting emotional and upset, I'm going to stop the meeting and we'll take a break and go outside for a while, because that just doesn't foster good relationships if parents or their relatives or whoever comes with them starts fighting with the school district. Showing respect. I think the school district staff needs to show respect and the parents need to show respect. And so that's, and take someone with you. Doesn't have to be a formal advocate, but take someone with you to meetings, so that if you're kind of caught up in some of the emotion of what's saying, they can kind of, talk to you about it later. It might be a neighbor, a relative, might be an advocate, but take someone with you to meetings. I told parents that when I was in the school district. Bring somebody with you. And then, when there are big disagreements, it probably is wise to call upon your local advocacy office or ARC or ASC, Autism Society office. Gentleman here from Oregon, do you have other advocacy offices out there?
Yeah, there are other nonprofits like Disability Rights Oregon who help people fight our state.
Oh. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then I usually tell parents after I've heard what they want, and then I kind of tuck that away after observing their child. I tell them, we're probably going to have to compromise here a little bit. You're probably not going to get after-school ABA from the school district. You're not going to get weekend therapy out of them. More speech, more OT. It can't just say the child needs more speech, the child needs more OT. you have to talk about the needs, and are the needs being serviced or provided by the present service delivery. If so, then they won't give you any more speech or any more OT.
This is really critical because I think when we say plan for a compromise, there's a sense of you're giving away something. And there are compromises and there are compromises. We're not talking about a child on the spectrum who's being restrained illegally and inappropriately 10 times a week. We're not talking about, well, let's cut that down to 5 times a week and we'll compromise. There's no compromise around something that's illegal, unethical. But we are talking about the alternative. If you aren't looking to go to a compromise, the emotions are so high, and the emotions can run high on both sides. And when I was mentioning earlier at the very beginning that there are times when going to a due process hearing is absolutely necessary. There's no other way to clear the air. But I would say that 99.9% of the time there are alternatives to a due process hearing. When you go to a due process hearing, the analogy that I use, I'll try to make this brief, is that before I got into special education, I was a clinical psychologist, and I was doing a lot of work for the courts around custody evaluations. Custody evaluations are horrible situations. The situation is so polarized. There's been so many attempts at working it out. They can't work it out. Their emotions are inflamed on both sides, and each side thinks that with a custody evaluation that the judge is going to order a clear-cut winner and a clear-cut loser. Mom, you're the best parent in the world. You get full custody. Dad, you're a jerk, and we're going to banish you to Bolivia for the rest of your life. That doesn't happen in the real world. It doesn't happen in due process hearings either. Due process hearings will typically involve some kind of compromise in terms of the school district gets this, the parent's family gets this, and guess what? 3 months later, you're going to be back meeting with them at an IEP meeting.
Right, the ones you just sued.
When you're ones you just sued, and people are angry, furious, you gotta avoid due process as much as possible and realize, just like a custody situation, you're going to be in a relationship with the school district for the next 5, 10, 15 years, and both sides better work on making it a reasonably, or a very healthy situation. So.
And when I say know your strengths, it's just how can you work with an educational advocate? Because, for example, I have a parent who says, I'm not going to say anything in that meeting because if I do, I'll get all upset. But she has everything all laid out. She has all their notes and stuff for me. She has everything all ready and prepared and can talk a lot before and after the meeting. So she knows that that's not her strength, is presenting in a meeting or even, but so she does other stuff. She makes sure, and she does get along with them well, but in a meeting she gets emotional and she knows it. So she doesn't say very much except, hello, and she brings goodies and stuff like that for the meeting. So you just kind of have to know how you're going to be. And that's kind of what we do. What do we do this year? Actually, the educational advocacy program with our chapter here in Colorado is only a year old. How'd that happen, Ed? You got on the board last year and then gave me a call, right?
Families, just to again, we have opening doors, educational offerings. We do a lot of work on helping parents navigate insurance systems. One thing we didn't do that I felt very strongly about was providing some direct service to families here in Colorado. And we had an opportunity, quite frankly, with Dixie retiring from the Cherry Creek School District, to work on this educational advocacy program. We think it's so important that we provide direct service to families, and that we have an educational advocate that knows not just special education in general, but autism in particular, and all the nuances that I don't have to tell you about. There are some great advocates out there that know the law, but don't really know the ins and outs and nuances of kids on the spectrum and how the impact on the educational system. So, for us here in Colorado, we wanted to provide this direct service. We know that this is something that so many of our families desperately need, and we just feel like we're filling the void.
Right. So.
I apologize, man. Is there a cost? I don't.
Yeah, that's a great question. That's one of our challenges, quite frankly. This will get into a little bit of the inside baseball with Autism Society. We were hoping that this work would be. There is a fee for Dixie service. We were hoping that it would be that the revenue that we would generate would be kind of self-sustaining in terms of keeping the program going. We found out pretty quickly, even though we kind of knew that was the case, that I'll be real blunt, that families, very affluent families, don't hire advocates when they're in those situations. They go right to the attorneys. So what we're finding is that we're working with families of more limited income that don't have access to high-priced attorneys and other expensive services. So the challenge for us, and thank you, it's a great question. It keeps us up at night a little bit, is that because we are working with families on a sliding scale in terms of what they can afford, and we're hoping that we're going to generate enough revenue through other sources, through our fundraising events and other private donations, that we can just make this a line item in our budget and not be dependent on the revenue that's coming, if that makes sense.
But there probably will be just a little fee, not a lot. I mean, for example, I had a family who had who was in the middle, maybe even upper middle, but their insurance was so bad from this company he was working with. It was a $20,000 deductible, and they were paying for therapies and all this for their child out of pocket. So they really didn't have any money. I mean, that kind. I mean, they had assets, but so the families are struggling with trying to keep up with things. So we want to have a slight fee, but not something that's going to damage, So we do that, but yes, sir.
Do you do transition IEP support as well, or are you mostly working with younger children?
Oh. Oh yeah. I have preschoolers, kindergartner, third grader, several middle school, a few high school, and a college student. That makes, there's somewhere in that 20 families, that range, So we take who needs the help, The college student had been homeschooled during his high school years. So when he got to college, it was like, oh my goodness, I'm out here in the world. I don't know what to do. So working with the resource center and helping him and the parent understand the real world, very high functioning young man. So, and then the little preschoolers, that are just beginning. So I work with all of them. Changing eligibility status, usually that's not an issue, but in one incident, the high functioning student had been staffed out but was struggling, mostly refusal to go to school. And so I was trying to get them to staff him in so they could provide more services. And the school didn't really want to do that. And we have meeting after meeting and to try and get, they did a reevaluation or an eligibility meeting. They did all those kind of things. And according to them, he was doing fine because his grades were good. But he wasn't in school. So So I said, if this was a student with emotional disabilities, you would have him in a program with emotional disabilities because he's refusing to go to school. So anyway, finally, what they ended up doing was putting him on a 504 and providing the accommodations that he needed to support him, like reducing his day because he couldn't get up in the morning to get there in time. So they missed school, so change of hours, just so we had to work on that. So we deal with everything from placements to eligibility to just disagreements to, not programming. Should it be, the school's having trouble with the child, so therefore the parent is having trouble, so just bringing that all together and providing private resources. So this one family in Douglas County, an elementary age student, was in general ed all the time, high functioning, and he was just causing all kinds of trouble, blowing out about every day. And they sent him home, and they were talking about having to send him to some other kind of school. Well, I got involved and found out that the family was struggling on that end with parenting. So I got them hooked up to a psychologist that their insurance would pay for, and a BCBA person went into the home, and he started behaving at school. So there's all kinds of dynamics that I work on and find out by working with families. You can't just go in with a narrow focus. You've got to look at the big picture and go from there. So that's kind of what we did this year. I kind of talked about the common issues, but school teams not trained to work with students with autism. Oh my goodness. I didn't realize what a good situation we had in our district, ladies. Some are just out of college, and the generic, what do they call that generic degree they get now? Generalist, yeah. And they really don't understand how to work with them. They think it's bad behavior.
One of our teachers, at least in Colorado, coming out of teacher schools, when you go to job fairs, exaggerating just a little bit, they want a job in special education. Tell us about your skills. You want to work in an inclusive setting. Great. What skills do you have? Can you teach reading? No. Can you teach math? No. The kids are people that are coming out of the new teachers are very often are so, at least in Colorado, we have a generalist degree, which means that they know a lot. They know a little about a whole lot, and not really focused in on autism or emotional disturbance. So there's a lot of retraining that goes on in Colorado.
And usually the parent knows more about it than the staff, and so we have to provide them with I suggested training that the state would provide and so forth, or a different program. Usually I say, let's get the heck out of here. And how fast. I think that, we're nearing the end, and any questions that you have. I like Helen Keller's little statements there. You're just one, but look what you can do. So what questions do you have for Ed and I? And we'll just let people go early.